Good morning, Bob. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Yeah, and morning, Chris. And lovely sunny morning and a day for a little bit of optimism, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we had a discussion last week, which I think is what I really want to expand on, because actually, as horrid as this year has been, it has been remarkably painful. There are a number of good things coming out of it. There are silver linings to the clouds, aren't there?
Well, there are. And Chris, what I'd like to think is, in 5 years' time, you and I are having coffee in the Goring Hotel and, reminiscing that, David Morgan Hewitt's now in his parlour in his mansion in Somerset, and Jeremy Goring's running around the hotel the way his father George did. But you and I can look back the 5 years and see, the positives that actually came out of this very difficult time. And maybe we're trying to, look forward and foresee that, but that's what I'd like to try and do this morning.
Yes, I think that would be good. That would be good. Because actually, shall we start with, the industry's probably never had a higher profile, has it?
Well, and I think this is important. I remember my time when I was handling sort of foot and mouth problems on behalf of the industry and having daily meetings with government, and Alistair Campbell saying to me, for the very first time, the internal communications briefing that's sent to all ministers features tourism and hospitality right at the top, and it'll actually get a much greater understanding of your sector. And to be fair, that understanding did last 2 or 3 years, but then disappeared. But I think this time round, because the crisis has been so much deeper and right across the country and affected every part of the country, it really has brought home to all politicians, senior civil servants, and society as large, how important hospitality, as opposed to just this term tourism, is to the UK economy. And I think that understanding will stand us in enormous good stead for the future.
I think that's it. It's not just government. This is actually the really exciting part of this is about society is actually really seen hospitality as well, isn't it?
Well, that's right. We've always had, I think, a problem that society didn't really understand what hospitality was about, what it contributed to the economy and what it contributed to society, and, the range of jobs and opportunities in the sector. And therefore, we had difficulty recruiting bright, young, good UK nationals to join our sector. And I think society now does fully understand hospitality, and they will see it in a different light in the future.
It's also brought the sector together, hasn't it, in a way that probably you haven't done for a number of years.
Oh, indeed. First of all, I pay tribute to Kate Nichols. I think she's done a great job at UK hospitality. And if I could offer one word of, advice, but also pat on the back, I found that handling the foot and mouth crisis on behalf of the industry gave me what I term, first of all, it gave me a profile, but it also gave me the authority and respect of the industry to then move forward and tackle other issues. And I'm sure because of the way Kate has come through this crisis and handled it, it has given her enormous respect across the sector to be its acknowledged leader, and she'll be able to use that goodwill to the benefit of the whole industry in the future. And I am really optimistic that we can build on that coming together and the experience that she will have gained over the last year. I mean, in terms of, it's almost like fighting a war. They talk about having had a good war. And I think Kate Nichols is one who's done really well during these difficult times, and the benefit to her and the whole industry will come into the future with that added respect that she has gained.
I mean, it's an interesting dilemma here, isn't there? Because you're right, Kate's going to come up with her status, her credibility, her profile's never been higher. for all the right reasons. At the same time, there's a lot of comments about where the leaders lead, because there's been so much commentary from leaders to reassure those people jobs.
Well, that is going to be part of her task, is that she has to bring the whole industry together, the big corporate players and the small bed and breakfast places. And even, should I suggest, I was very fortunate in the past that we had all motorway service operators. We had sort of 10,000 bed and breakfast operators. You've got to bring right across the sector together, whether it's hotels, restaurants, catering, leisure sectors, operators, everyone, big and small, right across the whole country together, to be able to listen to their needs, but also to work out how do we move the sector forward in the best way possible, recognizing the government's objectives as well. I'm sure she has the skills, but that will be the task for the future.
And the exciting thing now is that I think most people realise food really does play a central role in daily life, doesn't it? In a way that we haven't recognised.
Well, I think some of us have always understood how important food is, whether it's feeding youngsters in school, whether it's feeding people while they're working, or whether it's feeding people when they're at their leisure time, shall we say. Food is central. That is why, whatever is happening at the moment, there will always be a great future for this sector, because food is central to core of life, as it were.
No, it's interesting. The obvious question is, do we think we've learnt the lessons that have been come through from this period?
I think we are learning some of the lessons. Some of the lessons I think have to be learnt by the industry. Some have to be learnt by the wider society, some by government, and dare I say it, some by the bankers and financial investors, who we always need continued investment to drive this business forward. And I hope that some of the lessons have been learnt by them as well, that this sector does require investment, ongoing investment, but it needs investment which takes the long-term view of the sector and what it can do.
This is interesting, isn't it? One of the other interesting pieces about this is the regions have probably never had a higher profile. I think everyone now is talking about staycations, and that's just how...
Well, I think one of the real benefits to come out of this long term will be a rebalancing of the UK economy in hospitality terms. I think the last 10 years, perhaps, we've almost seen an overinvestment in the sector in city centres, whether that's been in hotels where brands have been concentrated and capital has followed the brands in city centre developments, or whether it's been in the casual dining sector in city centres. I think there's been enormous investment in just city centres, and the rural and regional areas in some cases have been starved of that investment. I think we've seen now how important it is, for instance, if you're an owner, to have a balanced portfolio, but two, I think with the growth of staycations, we are going to see strong growth in the rural and regional areas, and I think investment will therefore follow that. So we'll see a much more balanced economy in hospitality right across the regions, and I think that can only be good, quite frankly.
And I know you obviously advise a number of the kind of regional hotel groups. What kind of feedback are you getting from them?
Well, business was extraordinarily strong right up until the second lockdown in November, particularly in the southeast, the south, the southwest, and rural areas. And the contacts I have is that soon as business reopens tomorrow, day after tomorrow, there is a very strong pent-up demand which is going to be unleashed, and I see very strong trading in rural and regional areas where they are allowed to, quite frankly, for the foreseeable future, because I do not see a major return of inbound tourism, perhaps till next June at the earliest. So, there's going to be a very strong period of domestic trading to satisfy this pent-up demand. That's why I think that we will see strong growth in rural and regional areas.
I mean, that's the interesting piece, is how do you think things are going to change? You're right, we're not going to see international travel. I mean, June is a good forecast, but it's probably going to be even later than that, isn't it?
Well, I think it may start to recover in June, but as you say, it's not going. If one looks at the whole of next year, inbound tourism is not going to get back to pre-COVID levels for perhaps 2 or 3 years. So there's going to be this continuous strength of UK domestic tourism. So that's why investment, I am sure, will follow that strong demand, and I'm sure banks and lenders will recognize that strong demand by supporting hoteliers, restaurateurs, and new businesses that want to open, innovative new businesses want to open in the sector and supporting the sector in rural and regional areas. It'll be sort of a displacement or movement from city centre operations to rural regional centres.
I mean, that's the interesting piece. This is going to see lots of entrepreneurs set up, isn't it?
They are, and I'm hearing of any number already making, we've all learnt about using apps, using modern IT, using social media, et cetera, over the last 6 months. And out of any crisis like this, innovation comes forward, particularly amongst the younger people. And I am sure we are going to get a growth of innovative new businesses starting up over the next 6-9 month period, which again sort of renews the sector. That is why I have confidence in this sector, because it has this ability to renew itself, because providing great food, accommodation and service is a perennial need for society. So it's not like we're an industry that might suddenly go out of use, like maybe big department stores in city centres. This industry continually renews and changes and moves itself, because the real embedded skill it has is based in the people that work in it, and those people can move around to where the opportunity is. It's not based just on assets, or capital assets or fixed assets. It's based on the people. And those are the skills that we really want to focus on. And I am really, really happy that I think we are going to see far more UK-born nationals of whatever ethnicity who now want to enter this industry, so that we can have hotels and restaurants where local people can work in a local business.
That's quite a sea change, isn't it? I mean, that's quite a reversal.
Oh, it's an enormous one. If I give you examples of hotels down in the southwest, or out in rural or in the Lake District, rural hotels and restaurants where 70% of the workforce pre-COVID were from Eastern Europe or overseas, and whilst they were great workers and had great work aptitude and great skills, quite frankly, I always felt it sad that if you're going to experience a Lake District experience or a Southwest experience, that there are almost sort of no local people working in the premises to help the customer have that local experience. And so I'm really pleased to see that I think we are going to have a return of local people being able to find jobs in local hotels and restaurants and have good work experiences and ultimately good careers. And I think that can only be good for the sector.
No, I agree. And the other thing we're seeing, though, is a change in that supply piece of the industry. So the restaurant sector has obviously been oversupplied, and that's obviously going to alter.
Well, this is a harsh thing to say, perhaps, but the last 9 months have probably been a dose of very harsh medicine to tackle the oversupply of particularly food service outlets in the mid-market restaurant sector. I remember a very wise man saying to me some 10 years ago that when smoking was first stopped in pubs, we suddenly had 50,000 pubs essentially become restaurants. That was an enormous increase in the supply side of food services. We then saw enormous amounts of money from capital venture companies backing branded restaurants in high streets. And so we rapidly had, quite frankly, an oversupply in the sector. And we were beginning to see signs of strain on balance sheets before COVID arrived. But of course, after the 9 months of COVID that we've endured, we can now see that pain being suffered by all those businesses which had, quite frankly, unmanageable balance sheets. And we are going to see a lessening of those numbers in that sector. And if I'm in this imaginary conversation with you in the Goring, Chris, I'm sure looking back we'll say, actually, that was good for the sector to get rid of that oversupply.
Well, I think it's a shift in the sector, isn't it? You're right. I mean, there's been a problem coming, isn't it?
It has, and I think we see, one sees it in all sectors from time to time that because of a period of strong growth in a sector, one ends up having an oversupply in the sector, and ultimately the market sorts it out. I'm afraid this time it's been done in a fairly brutal way. One does sympathise for those people who are at the receiving end of it, but I have to say there was a massive oversupply of food service mid-market restaurants, and ultimately the great operators will survive. If you've got a great product with great service, you will come back, as it were. But so many were not great or exceptional, they were just average. So it will have sorted out that problem, and I think there is a very strong message to all operators in that sector there about how important it is to keep an eye on your balance sheet. You may be a great chef or a great restaurant operator in providing great service, etc., but you also have to be a businessman that keeps an eye on your balance sheet. And this last 9 months has been an eye-opener to those who perhaps haven't kept an eye on their balance sheet, and they quite frankly had absolutely stupid levels of leverage, shall we say, so that they were not able to account for what we've seen in the last few months. And now those with a stronger balance sheet will find a way through and will then flourish when things get back to the new norm.
How do you think things are going to change? How do you envisage how we come out of this? What do you think is going to change most?
Well, I think the big change will be, one, we won't see such a focus on city centre activity, which is one. Two is there will be much more use of IT, not just in our sector, but in every sector. And we see it all the time. And, of course, there are issues for the contract caterers about the concentrations of people working in city centres and how much food service will be required and what type of food service will be required. But, we've seen the positives of even the sector now recognising how important it is to take care of what I term the wider sustainability issues, that the business models we have to the future have to have what I term a wide sustainability approach, so that it's not just about using ingredients in a proper way, not just about using materials in a proper way, not just about looking at your supply chain, but having that balance and your place in society between the needs of the customer, the needs of society, and how you run your business.
I mean, that's one of the really exciting pieces, is that balance is really coming to the fore again. People are thinking about the picture.
Well, that's the point. The fact that they're thinking about it, I think, is a great start, and I think we will see that being built upon, so that is actually a real benefit that we've been pushed or forced into, one, doing the thinking about it, and two, as we start to reopen, put some of those thoughts into practice. Even simple things like, ensuring that your supply chain is as robust and dependable as possible, buying as much local materials as you can, using local employment where you can, recognizing use of the right cleaning materials, a whole range of what I term broadly sustainable issues, so that you recognize, because hospitality has this key role now in society, how we can use this key role to lead the way in having a sustainable business model.
I mean, one of the big changes has been how the industry's embraced technology, because it used to perhaps wasn't the greatest, I guess, at learning new tricks like that. But we've really
well, I think you're being kind, Chris. But yes, I think the last 9 months has been, quite frankly, a drastic learning process for maybe particularly people of our age, the older generation, where we thought we could just carry on to an extent the way we'd always carried on, and IT developments were left to the engineering sector or other sectors. We've now recognized that modern IT developments have a role to play in every business that you can think of, whether it's talking to your suppliers, whether it's talking to your staff, whether it's talking to your customers. In every way that you do your business now, modern IT has a role to play. And even how, you get your messaging out to everyone you want to talk to, whether internally or externally, how you can best use IT so it affects your sales activity, your marketing activity, your HR communications activity, in everything you do. And we've learnt that, I think, in the last 6-9 months, and I think the smart operators will be the ones who now put a lot of that into practice as we reopen. And don't think that we can just go back to the way we were 9 months ago. We have to adapt, as you say, and innovate, and it will be the ones who innovate most successfully will be the ones who succeed.
I mean, that's the interesting piece. I mean, you mentioned obviously smart operators, but actually it's really the ones who have listened and learned in this period, isn't it?
But isn't that always the case where, we've been, this sector, or even Britain as a whole, has been through any number of crises in the past, from, First World War, the 30s, Second World War, the 50s, hyperinflation, bomb scares, foot and mouth, SARS, you name it. That is life. Crises come along. The crises create perhaps new opportunities and new thinking, and it's the smart operators are the ones who see the opportunity, react to it, and get ahead. And all we've seen in the last 9 months, I think, is really, let's just say, a concentration of all the crises coming together, which has forced the innovation and the change. So we've probably seen 10 years worth of change and innovation concentrated into 9 months. So that is why I'm confident that as we gradually get back to normal, the sector is going to thrive again, and thrive probably even more so.
Well, two things. One, we haven't mentioned the B word, Brexit, because it's almost in the background, but not really being talked about, isn't it?
I have to say, I still cannot believe that a deal cannot be constructed that is in the interests of the United Kingdom and the interests of Europe, or the EC, the EU. I think it would be an absolute monstrous failure of both sides if a deal cannot be done. And I cannot believe that there aren't enough sensible people around in positions of power, whether it's in France, Germany, London, etc., that cannot see that it would be a monstrous failure of public policy on all sides if a deal cannot be constructed in both their interests. I think it's as simple as that. And I still cannot believe that Mr. Barnier can go back to Brussels and say, I can't do a deal, for example. That would be a monstrous failure from their side, as well as a monstrous failure from Boris Johnson's side. So let's still be hopeful that a deal can be constructed, perhaps even this week.
I mean, one of the constant comments coming through is the disconnect between what I call real life in the private sector and kind of the political world. Do you think that's getting closer now and bridged? That's part of this, isn't it?
Yes, and I think that has always been the case, and I suppose to an extent always will be the case. There is this disconnect. You see it with politicians all the time that, as it were, when they're doing one job, they're very connected to the people. Then they get elected and become an MP, and they become a little bit more distant. Then they become a minister, and they become more distant still. And then they join the cabinet, and they become totally distant. Never mind the person in power. And I think that is always a problem of those in power understanding, as it were, the people they represent. And that is no different a challenge to the chief executive of a large company, understanding the needs and the thinking of the people who work for him. It's just the same challenge. If you are, for example, the chief executive of Compass Group, and they have 500,000 people plus in the whole group, he's got a real task of understanding the catering assistant in one of his catering operations. But that's his challenge. And that's the challenge of leadership, quite frankly, is understanding who it is you're leading, what their aspirations are, and being able to communicate and listen to those people in an effective way. That's the role of leadership, whether you're in political life or whether you're in business life.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because PwC recently came out with a report saying we're going to go back to training levels of the 1970s. But the 1970s and 80s actually lay the ground for what was really a golden period in the 90s and 90s, wasn't it?
Well, I think we did understand then, and there was a great effort to actually invest more in people. And maybe one of the lessons that we might get out of the last 9 months is, particularly for our sector, one, how important it is to invest in people capital as opposed to finance. And perhaps one of the problems of the last 15 years is that money was so readily available and it was so cheap to raise money that people forgot the importance of the people capital. And if one looks to the needs of now and the next few years, because there's going to be so much restructuring going on right across the British economy, and people will have to move jobs, there's a recognition now that all those people, not just in our own sector, but in all sectors, are going to need more training to give them new skills. So I'm hopeful now that we will see a major investment in people to improve their skills, retrain people right across British society. So maybe that's another benefit to have come out of this recognition that, people are really what makes societies work, and how important it is to fulfill people's needs, give them the chance to get on in life as much as they can, but give them the skills to do the tasks in hand.
Bob, on that note, I think I'll bring us to a close. It's been fantastic talking to you. I mean, I think 2021 could be quite a good year for many reasons as we rebuild. We've just got to rebuild in the right mindset, haven't we?
Well, exactly. You can gather I'm in a fairly optimistic mindset now. I think that I can see light at the end of the tunnel. I can see promise for our sector, and I can see that we will have learned a lot of lessons from the last 9 months, which can only be an advantage to the sector. And if I've got to look 5 years ahead, I see a really successful sector powering ahead. So I'm looking forward to having that cup of coffee in the Goring with you in 5 years' time, Chris.
I look forward to that too, Bob. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Good to speak to you. Bye-bye.